Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Chenjerai Kumanyika, Assistant Professor of Communication Studies at Clemson University. Hi, Chenjerai.
Hi, how you doing?
The Islamic State in Iraq and Syria has taken over the entire Syrian city of Palmyra and apparently controls half the entire country. Palmyra, known for its ancient ruins, lies north of the capital Damascus and once lay on the famed ancient Silk Road. Given the propensity of ISIS to destroy ancient artifacts, historians fear that Palmyra's ruins are in grave danger. ISIS is also likely to take advantage of the city's gas fields and the fact that it lies at the nexus of many intersecting roads, enabling the group access to even more of Syria. Many thousands have already evacuated the city of 65,000 residents. The capture of Palmyra comes just days after ISIS took over the key Iraqi city of Ramadi in what are being seen as stunning successes for the militant Sunni rebel group. ISIS has massacred untold numbers of Iraqis and Syrians just in the past few weeks. Well, Chenjerai, how is it that a ragtag group of rebels has enjoyed so much success so fast, despite having the might of the U.S. and several of its allies arrayed against it?
Yeah, this is the question that everyone's looking at. I think, it's tempting to say that it's the sheer force of their willingness to use violence. But of course, ISIS doesn't have a monopoly on the use of violence to kill civilians. I think they've been innovative in terms of finding ways to fund themselves, and the capture of Palmyra's ruins will probably be used in this way. But also, opposing ISIS requires that several different parties who typically disagree, meaning like some of the individual tribes in Syria and Iraq, as well as parties like the U.S. and Iran, have to find ways to work together in order to counter them. So I think it's all these things. I mean, ISIS didn't come from nowhere. ISIS built on Al-Qaeda and is able to draw in soldiers who are being formed in various conflicts, some of which the U.S. foreign policy has a lot to do with. So
Right.
It's really a big problem.
A bizarre twist in the Rohingya refugee crisis has just emerged days after boats carrying thousands of people hailing from Burma's persecuted Muslim minority were discovered off the coast of Malaysia. The African nation of Gambia has offered to take them in. The government of Myanmar does not consider Rohingya as Burmese citizens, despite their presence in the country for generations. Waves of migration through human trafficking networks have led to an exodus of Rohingya families. Those found on the boats have been trapped there for months in horrific conditions, with Malaysia, Indonesia and Thailand all refusing to accept the refugees. Now, Gambia's government has released a statement saying, quote, "As human beings, more so fellow Muslims, it's a sacred duty to help alleviate the untold hardships and sufferings fellow human beings are confronted with." But Gambia's president, Yahya Jammeh, has been criticized for ignoring a similar crisis of African migrants dying in the Mediterranean Sea as they attempt to reach Europe. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is due to meet with Myanmar officials and has been urged by dozens of lawmakers here to address the Rohingyas' persecution. Chenjerai, what do you make of Gambia's offer?
Well, the Rohingya people are one of the world's most persecuted minorities, a stateless people, and as such, they're subject to being used as pawns in the political efforts of various leaders. And so I think we have to look carefully on the statements by Gambia's president. I mean, on one hand, it's encouraging he's willing to take them in. On the other hand, I think we are right to question how he's treating the Muslim population in his own country who has been trying to get to Europe. We can also simply look skeptically on the U.S.'s efforts, humanitarian efforts. I mean, there's many populations that the U.S. affects, here. Look at like the debate about immigration here, and say, to what extent are we actually really concerned with helping disenfranchised populations? So we have to raise questions about how vulnerable people get used as political pawns.
And finally, here in the U.S., a number of organizations, including the Black Youth Project 100, Black Lives Matter, and Ferguson Action, have launched a National Day of Action today, with protests scheduled across the country. The actions are aimed at drawing attention to the often underreported police and vigilante violence against black women and girls, including queer and transgender women. Under the banner of Black Women and Girls Matter, activists hope to draw attention to the cases of Rakia Boyd, Ayana Jones, Alicia Thomas, and Maya Hall, among many others. Actions are planned in Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Seattle, and other cities, and come a day after the African American Policy Forum released a report entitled "Say Her Name: Resisting Police Brutality Against Black Women." Chenjerai, how important is the series of actions today?
this is extremely important. This is a movement that we've seen kind of be a little bit on the margins of the Black Lives Matter movement. People mentioning these names, trying to get women and transgender persons to be addressed, the violence against them. But now we're seeing coordinated effort, and I think it's extremely important. Also, I encourage everyone to check out the report by the African American Policy Forum. In it, you'll find similar, evidence of similar disparities to what we see in young unarmed African American men. For example, in 2013, all the women stopped in New York, 13.4% were white, 53.4% were black, and 27.5% were Latino. So this is a problem, and I'm glad to see that these other populations and folks are being drawn into the conversation and being put at the center of it.
Right, and of course we should remind ourselves that many of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement have been Black women and members of the Black queer and transgender community. Thank you so much, Chenjerai, for joining us.
That's right.
Chenjerai Kumanyika is our daily Newsflash guest expert and assistant professor of communication studies at Clemson University. We'll be right back.